Hello, Biology 1 students. Mitch Albers here, your course instructor. And this is going to be my lecture presentation to get us started on Chapter 1, an introduction to biology, what biology is all about. Biology is the study of life. And so when I'm in class, this first lecture meeting, to get students thinking about what life is, I use a interactive program where students can use their Wi-Fi devices, their smartphones, their tablets, their PCs, and we log into the Wi-Fi network on campus, and then I take them to a place called Learning Charateristics, and this is tied in with your mastering account, and so I use this in class to get a feel for what students are thinking about. And this gives me a chance to ask lots of questions to see and evaluate how students are thinking about things when it comes to biology. So when it comes to trying to figure out what is biology and what is the study of life and living things, I'm going to start off with a few questions. So for your situation here this week where we're not meeting for the lecture face-to-face, we can kind of do the same thing. And what I'd like you to do is just get a piece of scratch paper, and then you can write your answers down as we kind of progress through these different slides. So the first question here is that you see that organism, the picture of that organism in the screen there, and the question is it alive or living, or dead, non-living? You can only pick one of two answers. So write down what your answer is. That thing alive or not? Okay? And then we'll go on to the next slide. Okay. Now, look at the picture. That's another organism. Can you identify that organism? And again, jot down your answer. Is that living or dead? Okay, here's the third one. You see that thing in the middle of the picture there? The reddish brown thing on the ground? Again, can you identify it? And is it living or dead? All right, next slide. What is that thing in the slide? Some of you will know and some of you might not know. And again, just answer the question. Are they alive or are they not alive? Are they alive or dead? Okay. This next question. See what's in the picture there? Answer the question. Alive or dead? Or maybe you're not sure. Okay. What we're looking at here, the question has to do with the mule. Is it alive or dead? When you get a horse crossed with a donkey, you get a hybrid called a mule. Is the mule alive or dead? Okay, let's go back and go through these again. So look at your list here. For this first organism, you should have identified that's a horse. And a horse is, I guess I've never had anybody say that they thought a horse was not alive and not a living thing. So we all should agree. You should have wrote down it's alive, it's living, right? Pretty simple. Yes, and a horse is alive. But what makes it alive? Well, that's what you're reading chapter 1 about. What makes that horse alive, or that horse has a set of characteristics, living characteristics, that makes it alive. It exhibits movement. It grows. It wasn't a big adult horse. It started off actually as a single cell. When the horse's parents' gametes, egg and sperm, came together to make a zygote, and then it divided into 2 cells and 4 cells, and now it's this multi-trillion celled organism called a horse. Okay, it takes energy from its environment. It eats grasses. It gives off waste. It gives off carbon dioxide. It urinates. It defecates. It gets rid of waste. It assimilates. It undergoes metabolism. These are things that all living things have to have in order to be alive and living. Horses have exhibited change over time. They've undergone their own evolution. They have an evolutionary past. All living things evolve in nature. That's a characteristic of life. Okay? It responds to stimuli. If you slap it in the butt, it's gonna, or put a harness on it, reins. If you can control the horse by stimulus and response. All living things exhibit stimulus and response. So these are a universal set of characteristics that living things must have in order to be alive and living. And the horse has all those things, so obviously it is alive. Okay? All right, so what did you identify these? These are bacteria. This is a high magnification of a bunch of bacteria. These little rod-shaped, these could be a very common E. coli bacteria that we have in our environment. And they're entrenched in our skin. They're in our digestive system. They're all over the place. They're good for us, but sometimes too much of them can be a bad thing. But so the question is, are they alive? And if you know anything, if we look at these bacteria and we think about those characteristics, they move, they grow. They take in energy from their environment. They assimilate. They undergo metabolism. They give off waste. They respond to stimuli. Not exactly like the horse did, but they do all those things in their way. And because bacteria have evolved to be bacteria. And they're a different kind of organism, but nonetheless, they share all those living characteristics. They have evolved. They are evolving. We are witnessing bacteria evolving in front of our own eyes all the time. We're constantly trying to keep ahead of these bacteria before they find a mutation and try to get around an antibiotic that we're using to try to keep them under control. So bacteria definitely are alive and living. So you should have answered alive to get that one right. All right, well, you should identify that as a big old rock that's just sitting there. And when we look at the rock, does it move? No. Does it grow? No. Is it taking energy from its environment? No. Is it giving off waste? No. When we start to think about all those characteristics of life, the rock doesn't really have any of them. And so we can safely say that a rock is not living. It doesn't show any of those characteristics of life. And again, to be living, you have to have all of those characteristics. You can't just have, just a couple and say you're alive. You got to have all of them, and a rock doesn't have any. So it's a non-living entity. All right. What did you identify this as? If you think it's a virus, well, then you're right. And it's one of many different kinds of viruses that are in our world. And if you answered this, and here's sometimes a big misconception that's out there, A lot of you probably wrote down alive and living. And we sometimes treat viruses like, kind of like they're like bacteria, but they're not. They're viruses. And a virus is a non-living entity. Viruses do not have any of those characteristics of life like the horse and the bacteria. Okay, and again, they may have one or two, okay, but you got to have all of them. So virus is number one. They don't grow. They don't move. They don't take energy from their environment. They don't give off waste. They don't metabolize. They don't assimilate. They don't do a lot of those things that we saw with the horse and the bacterium. Okay, what is a virus? Well, what you're seeing there, that ornate pattern, that's all just protein. And on the inside of the virus, you're going to find either DNA or RNA, which is a characteristic that living cells have DNA in them. And there are some viruses that have DNA, and there are a whole class of viruses called retroviruses that have RNA inside of them. But they don't have a nucleus like cells. The DNA and RNA isn't housed inside a nucleus. It's just a protein capsule with a nucleic acid, DNA or RNA in it. That's it. But they can make our lives very miserable. And so we kind of treat them as living. But if you have a viral infection and you go to the doctor, can they give you anything to help kill it? No, you can't. An antibiotic isn't going to do you any good, because how can you kill something that's not alive? And viruses are not alive. But sometimes, just kind of, especially in the medical profession, I think, we hear about viral infections and we treat them a lot like living things. So let's not get caught up into, thinking that viruses are alive. That's a major misconception that's out there, and that's one of the things that we want to make sure we're clear about in studying life and biology. Is there are some misconceptions, and we want to make sure we clarify those. Okay? So viruses are non-living entities. It's always kind of a shock to students when we discuss that. Okay. So obviously, there's a Harley Davidson motorcycle, and you all answered it's dead, non-living. Okay, but I threw this picture in here just for discussion wise. Is that, let's say comparing the motorcycle to the rock. Well, the motorcycle, if you think about those characteristics of life, you can make some arguments. Does a motorcycle grow? Well, not on its own. It gets built at the factory. It starts with a frame, and you add an engine and wheels and a gas tank and a seat and handlebars, and it grows, right? One of the major things that makes all living things alive is the ability to reproduce. Okay, and motorcycles obviously don't reproduce. You don't see like a motorcycle, a cop motorcycle and a Harley getting together and having a litter of mopeds, right? Motorcycles don't reproduce; they get produced at the factory, and so that in itself, is why motorcycles aren't alive. But when you think about those other characteristics, a motorcycle isn't made up of cells either, but it's made up of parts, and so is your body. Your body's made up of organs, but those organs are made up of cells. So when we start thinking about it, does a motorcycle respond to stimuli? You bet. You turn the throttle, it goes. You tap the brakes, it stops. That's response to stimuli. Does it take in energy from its environment? Absolutely. You put gas in the gas tank, where'd that gas come? It comes from the environment. Okay? Does it metabolize? Well, in that engine, the carburetor is delivering oxygen and gas to the engine. There's undergoing combustion, and it's producing waste, carbon dioxide. You're getting that assimilation. That's a characteristic that living things have. But again, the motorcycle has some of them, but not all of them. So we got to make sure we don't get caught. We got to have all those living characteristics in order to be alive. So my point is the motorcycle is a little bit more alive than that rock example, okay, because the motorcycle has some of those characteristics, but it's not alive. Let's just make that straight. It just has more living characteristics than like a rock. that has none. Okay? So let's go on to the next example. The mule. Okay? Is the mule alive? Well, you answered the horse was alive, and so an offspring from a, I would assume that you would think a donkey's alive. And so when we get a mule, when we cross a horse and a donkey, you get a mule. And here's an organism that can pull a plow. It takes in, is breathing. It's taking in, eating food and taking things out of its environment as an energy source. It moves, it grows. It's got DNA. It's made of cells. But when it comes down to reproduction, can you cross mules? Can you get a mule from a mule? No, it's a hybrid. And mules, unfortunately, don't reproduce with each other. Okay? And the only way you get a mule is by crossing a horse with a donkey. So based on that, and that, coming back to that motorcycle, motorcycles don't reproduce, but what about the mule? Okay? So because they can't reproduce with each other of themselves, does that mean it's not alive? Okay? Well, there's always rules, and then there's always exceptions to rules. And this is kind of a situation where it's not realistic, because in nature, horses and donkeys, they're separate species. They wouldn't reproduce with each other. What has happened is we humans, have forced horses and donkeys to reproduce with each other to produce the mule, because we wanted the mule to do the work for us. So we forced that reproduction to happening. The hybrid mule doesn't have compatible gametes to reproduce its own kind. So it's an artificial situation. But to answer the question, the mule is as alive as the horse. Okay? So, I could ask the question, what if I put a picture of my great-grandmother who was still living at some point? Is she alive? Absolutely. But is she going to reproduce? If the picture was taken when she was 85, 90 years old, not a chance. But she did reproduce, or otherwise I wouldn't be talking here trying to explain this stuff to you. She's proven that she's reproduced in the past. So we can't say that the ability to reproduce is a characteristic of life. Probably the capacity to reproduce would be a better way of stating it, because in the situation of my great-grandmother, she had that capacity. But if we're looking at, after, she's 85, 90 years old, she's gone through menopause. And women that have gone through menopause at that age, they can't reproduce anymore. But they're still definitely alive. So these are all things to think about. Okay? So here's a new question. There's a graveyard, a bunch of headstones. Okay? So what's the answer? When are humans dead? I want you to write down, when is it that a human is dead? And again, if we did this in class, we're going to get a whole range of answers. Nobody's going to have it. There's not going to be one answer. Okay? So here, when are humans dead? We humans can't agree when somebody's dead. Okay? The legal system, we have a death certificate. There's a piece of paper that says when we are dead. Gives you the date and the time. Okay? But when does that happen? Okay? You could go to your minister, your priest, your rabbi, and ask them, when is it when we are dead? I'm sure they're going to come up with a different answer. Okay? And some of you are going to write down, well, when your heart stops beating, when you stop breathing, when your brain activity stops. Okay? There is no universal agreement when we die. And when somebody actually dies, there are cells in your body that stay living for weeks. After somebody has passed away, and let's say we have a traditional burial, that person in their coffin underground is still growing hair and toenails and fingernails. Kind of creepy, but it's a fact, that, we just don't die and everything of us dies. Some of our cells keep going for a while. They still have a way of maintaining those cells in our what we are supposedly dead body. Okay, so what if I ask the question, when does life begin? Oh my gosh, huge controversy, right? There's no universal agreement on that. So this is what biology is all about. We have to ask these questions, and sometimes what we like to have very specific, short, nice, clean answers to some of these questions. And when we get into studying life, we're going to find out it gets messy, and it sometimes isn't as clear, what that answer is going to be. So this just makes for good stuff to talk about, because this is what this class is dealing with. It's all about trying to understand how life is. So, when do we die? There isn't an exact answer. Again, nobody agrees on it. Okay, so that is just kind of getting a brief introduction to thinking about what life is and what biology is about. And this is just an activity that I do to get started to thinking about that. Okay, and in chapter 1, you're learning about these characteristics of life, and this is just getting you thinking. Okay, and we will be diving deep into many questions this semester. And this is just kind of one of those activities that get us starting to think about what life is all about. So we'll see you in the next screencast. Thanks for watching and participating, and we'll see you then.